Welcome everybody. Thanks so much for taking time out of your day to join SMP's Cloud Security panel. We have some unbelievable panelists with us today that are going to talk about cloud security and all the challenges that exist, both pre and post-pandemic. This panel is going to be moderated by SMP's Jonathan Borgeson. Jonathan's been with us several years now as a security solutions specialist in this space. I'm going to take just a couple of minutes and introduce those who don't know much about us to SMP prior to introducing the panelists formally, and then we'll have a closeout at the end following all of the Q&A. Okay, so this is the event that you all registered to. Thanks again for attending. It is going to run for around 90 minutes, assuming that we need all that time. We are lucky enough to have today with us Google, Equinix, Beckage, and IGNW on the panel. And as I mentioned, John Borgeson will be moderating that panel throughout the day. Just a couple of things about SMP for folks who don't know. Really, what is our difference at the end of the day? As a reminder, we're a national and international solution provider who focuses on cloud data center, networking, security, and collaboration technologies. And at the end of the day, we know that you have technology challenges, and we have solutions along with our partner ecosystem, which we'll talk about here at the end today. Really, at the end of the day, solutions that accelerate your digital transformation in this incredible time, brought to you with integrity, delivered with passion by the nicest people around. I know some may say, wow, by the nicest people around, that's interesting. We got this feedback from our clients at the end of the day. We had a third party go out and really respond to surveys and information about what it's like working with SMP and what our true difference is. And this is what they had to say about us. All right. Another thing that I want to highlight here is the SMP Service Guarantee. Simply put, we put a service guarantee around everything that we design and deliver and manage for our clients. All right. So if we don't adhere to the T's and the C's that we execute together in statements of work, then you simply don't pay. Take you quickly through our history. I'm not going to go through all of this, but we're 23 years old this year, going on 24 years old, privately owned, all right? And over time, we have a wealth of awards. And you're gonna see on this specific slide that we have close alignment to the traditional infrastructure and software players in Dell EMC, VMware, and Cisco, all right? And then across the bottom, you're gonna see a recurring theme that we're a wonderful place to work. All right, most recently, we were named the second best company to work for in New York State and the #1 IT company to work for in New York State. And that is the 4th year in a row that we have received the best companies to work for in New York. Also this year, we were a top workplace to work for on National Inc. Best Workplaces. 2 weeks ago, we also received the Regional Partner of the Year Award with Cisco from an execution excellence perspective. So we're very, very happy to highlight that. We've had a wonderful year in 2020 without getting too into the weeds, a number of different accolades, but I think it's important for folks to know here, if you were to highlight anything here with regards to today's panel, we were a top security firm ranked out of the Albany Business Review in New York when it comes to cybersecurity. So very, very much in line with the things that we're going to be talking to today. We also just recently opened a new office in Buffalo in One Seneca Tower. All right, so we're on the 28th floor there. Very, very excited to have space in there as Buffalo is one of our premier markets. With regards to where our locations are, again, we do have worldwide services and serve national and international clients, but we do only have 4 locations. As I mentioned, Buffalo, but we're headquartered in Rochester, New York, and also have locations in Albany and Burlington, Vermont. Very, very healthy growth from a revenue perspective, as you can see in the top or the bottom left-hand corner. And in fact, we're very, very happy to say that we just finished our fiscal year. We run November 1 through October 31st, and we were flat year over year. All right, so in these trying times, we couldn't be more happy to say that. So again, just north of 100 million revenue again. We do have 115 employees at SMP as well, with the majority of those individuals being in the territories right here that we call out from a locations perspective, but we do have architects and engineers across the country. Strategic partners, 2 of them highlighted here that are on the panel today, all right, when it comes to Equinix and Google, all right, specifically, but we're also strategically aligned with Cisco. We're a gold certified partner with them and a master collaboration partner with them. Big relationships with Dell, NetApp, and VMware. We're one of only 11 partners in the country to have 3 or more master services competencies with VMware. So very happy to say that, and very strategically aligned with Microsoft and AWS. We'll talk more about IGNW and Beckage as strategic services partners as today goes on. From a solution portfolio perspective, I know that there is a lot on this slide, all right, but this is how we go to market. All right, so if we were to focus on the 5 pillars in the center, going left to right, heavy emphasis on cloud, which we're here to talk about today, traditional data center solutions along with digital edge solutions with Equinix, for example, big enterprise networking practice from software-defined networking to core distribution, access layer, and wireless, including programmability, IoT, and carrier services. Big security practice, which we're here to talk about today in conjunction with cloud and data center, and then a very large collaboration practice. So this is where your unified communications, voice, video conferencing, and the like sits. We offer a wealth of services across these 5 pillars, from managed services, which is very, very important when it comes to security and cloud, as you very much know, to professional services where we get into consulting, design, and delivery, lifecycle services with an emphasis on road mapping, solution lifecycle, ROI, right? Maximize the investments that you put into the solutions that you invest in. And then, of course, staffing services. So not just our professional services, but in the event that organizations are looking to help augment their staff with full-time resources, we can help in that regard. The ribbon across the top is where we focus on innovation across these 5 pillars. All right, so think development, next generation programmability, product process automation and analytics and intelligence, data science, user experience management offerings, and then AI for IT operations, which fits really, really nicely for solution providers like SMP because we go across the stack of technology. So working with our clients to help them understand where they can optimize and improve operational efficiencies with AI is something that we're heavily focused on now. With that, I want to transition over to Jonathan Borgeson, again, Security Solutions Specialist with SMP, to introduce our panelists for today. Jonathan?
Thank you very much, Sean. And hello, everyone. We are thrilled today to be joined by a fantastic panel of individuals that have extensive knowledge and experience around cloud computing and securing the cloud. Joining us today is Jennifer Beckage, who's a cybersecurity attorney and founder at Beckage Law Firm. John Bacon, a cloud engineer for Google Cloud. Vaughn Eisler, the director of business development security at Equinix. Jeff Ridgely, security lead at IGNW, which is an IT modernization and service organization focusing on software-defined networking and cloud installations. Before diving into the discussion, I'd like to ask each panelist to kind of take a couple minutes just to review some of their background and experience to kind of assist with the people participating and understanding who's going to be speaking today. So Jennifer, if you don't mind taking the lead on that, and then we can just go down the list from there.
No problem. Thank you so much for that introduction. Really excited to be on today's panel. As mentioned, I'm the founder. I'm also the managing director of Beckage. It's a full service data security and privacy law firm. So we only handle data security and privacy issues. This includes regulatory compliance, so IT contracting to policy development. We also handle incident response. For the last 3 years, I've been named one of the top 30 data breach lawyers in the country by Cybersecurity Docket. We handle a lot of headline-making breaches, and as some of you may or may not be aware, but there's new case law that makes clear, the importance of attorneys in a data breach to coordinate the response team and keep that under privilege. Our firm also handles data security and privacy litigation all across the U.S., and we also assist under privilege with risk assessments. So if an organization has some concerns about what they're doing from a technical perspective and working with some of their vendors, understanding their enterprise risks, we do that under privilege with our certified information systems auditor. We have offices from California to New York. Our team of lawyers are also technologists and certified privacy professionals, including myself. Prior to becoming an attorney, I used to own and run tech companies, one of which I sold to a publicly traded company and was retained as vice president of operations for all their technical and service products. And more information is available at beckage.com.
Great, John, if you don't mind going next.
Awesome. And thanks for having me. I'm John Bacon. I'm a cloud partner engineer at Google. What that means is I help our services partners and consulting companies that work with our customers to migrate to cloud, modernize their applications, and take advantage of other Google Cloud services. I'm a technical resource or an engineer that supports those services companies that are working alongside our customers. I've been at Google almost 3 years, based on the West Coast out of Washington State. And my job is somewhat of a technology generalist, but I spend a lot of my time focusing on security, including lots of extra certifications and classes. And it's an area where I understand that every solution that we work on, security is going to be a key component. So I make sure it's a priority.
Great, thank you. And Vaughn?
Yeah, thanks. Vaughn Eisler. I'm in a business development or alliance and partner role over at Equinix. I suspect some of you have heard about Equinix, but maybe not all. For those of you that have, we're probably mainly known as a data center company where companies and enterprises locate their equipment. But in reality, what we focus on more than anything else is the idea of interconnecting ecosystems together. So allowing enterprises to communicate privately with clouds or with networks, or clouds to work together to create sort of these high performance, low latency value chains and use cases. So customers usually come to Equinix when our friend here. And when they do that, they'll very often talk to Equinix about how they re-architect security in some sort of hybrid or multi-cloud architecture. So we spend a lot of time with customers going through their digital transformation or their cloud journey and how they can re-architect security controls to focus on the clouds and their on-prem solutions.
Great, Jeff. Oh, Jeff, I think you're on mute.
That is correct. Jeff Ridgely, thanks for having me. I am the cybersecurity practice lead for IGNW. And what we do as a company, just as a quick little overview, is we focus on things to make our customers go fast. So it's all around digital transformation, digital velocity. We focus on 4 different pillars. Automated infrastructure, so infrastructure as code, DevOps, that kind of stuff, hybrid and multi-cloud solutions for our customers, app modernization and software engineering. So we build software, we build cloud native applications for customers as they're migrating to the cloud. And we also have a pillar around data ops and artificial intelligence and machine learning. So kind of your big data and analytics type capabilities. And then we have security kind of embedded across all of those 4 different areas, and that's sort of my job. And I've been with IGNW for about 1.5 years, but I've been doing security consulting for the last 5 years. Before that, I spent 15 years in healthcare, doing various cybersecurity roles, from engineering to architecture to managing teams. So a lot of background on the regulatory side for healthcare, and also security technologies and architectures.
Great. So I appreciate the time that you guys are spending with us today and going through some background. One of the things that SMP has seen quite drastically recently is this adoption of moving to the cloud. It's important to note that cloud is not necessarily new or it's been around for a number of years, but with the pandemic and how things are navigating now, we've seen a tremendous amount of growth towards people transitioning and moving processes to the cloud. So John, if you wouldn't mind taking a second and discuss how is the inherent security protocols for cloud computing changing as these organizations are transitioning to the cloud?
Yeah, definitely. So I think a lot of organizations see the move to cloud as something that might create additional risk or even make them less secure. I tend personally to think the opposite. I think moving to the cloud can actually help organizations improve their security and risk posture. Traditionally, when enterprises look at security, the focus was on how do we protect the perimeter. But with this shift to cloud, there's a focus now on how do we protect our data, right? And so in the cloud, I can be restrictive on, under what conditions or what services are authorized to see and access that data. This shift is causing a bit of friction. As an organization, do I, replicate traditional defenses, or do I inherit these new ones, right? And also, how does that affect the regulators, right? If my business is governed by something like PCI or FedRAMP, I need to take that into account as well. It's definitely an interesting shift. But what we're seeing is this defensive posture is actually stronger and more difficult for adversaries to compromise than the traditional defenses. If you think about it, right, gaining access to someone's data can be done in multiple ways, right? Insider threats, misconfigured firewalls, credential stealing through phishing attacks, and many other methods. And so at Google, we rely on this idea of defense in depth, right, or layered security. And essentially what that means is we need to build in different security features at every level. That's from the physical data center to the server, the physical server to the OS to the application to the network, all the way up to the user. And we're not going to assume any trust between any services. We're going to use multiple mechanisms to establish and maintain trust. So I could definitely talk a lot about the different security mechanisms that we have in place at every layer, but I'll pass it on to see if anyone else has anything to add.
No, and so Jen, from a legal perspective, right, again, from my own experience and understanding organizations' timidness, we'll say, from moving to the cloud in earlier days, a lot of that was around sensitive data, all right, governance and compliance. From your perspective, how are you seeing organizations kind of handling that change now when they're moving to the cloud?
Yeah, I agree with what John just said. I think, a number of years ago, there was some hesitancy in moving to the cloud, thinking that, we could keep it secure ourselves on-prem. Why would we want to move to the cloud? But, understanding budgets and constraints and very fast emerging laws in privacy and security, cloud may offer organizations a more secure platform because you've got more eyes on it, right? You've got more people handling this information and taking steps to protect it, more than the resources you may have within your own organization. But the first step really is to understanding, what data you want to move to the cloud and where is it going? Cloud service providers have potentially data centers all over the world. So organizations should understand where their data is stored, and maybe even prohibiting the provider from moving it without notification or written consent. And this is because there's some laws that may provide restrictions as to where data is stored or transferred. For example, many financial institutions can't store data outside the US. Some laws like the GDPR, which is the European Union's data privacy law, require certain data to be kept in the EU, or certain measures need to be taken if you're going to transfer that data outside of it. Under HIPAA for PHI, for protected health information, that information should be physically stored in the US and no offshore access. But again, there could be an offshore access plan. But in addition to just thinking about where that data is stored, when we're working with our clients, it's not just where it is, but who has access to it. So when you have this follow the sun support services, even though the data is in the US, someone outside of the US may have access to it. So these are all things that would need to be considered. And, just from a compliance and governance standpoint, just like any other vendor, you're going to want to review appropriate security controls. How is that information being protected, and does it match the legal requirements? Different CSPs or cloud service providers provide different controls that can be leveraged by the business. So for example, you might have the right to create certain security groups or dictate traffic in and out. You want to make sure that you understand, is your data commingled with other data? Is there logical or physical separation? Data may need to be physically separated in a database depending on its sensitivity. It may also help prevent from data incidents from propagating throughout, a data center into your environment. Encryption, right? What level of encryption standards do we need to deploy? Backups, all these things really need to be considered. But, not to belabor the point, because I know no one loves to hear a lawyer talk about it, but I think it's so important to really start with, the laws and the regulations. And, I started off in tech before as a lawyer. So, I love really meshing these two disciplines together. There's really privacy concerns and security concerns. And most, I think what we talked about so far is comfort with moving to the cloud for security purposes. But there may be also under privacy laws some benefits too. If individuals are making data subject requests to delete or access their information, can your cloud service provider help you honor those certain requests? But again, it really comes down to understanding the laws, making sure that you're applying that through your contractual provisions, and then doing where permissible auditing of your cloud service provider to understand where all that sensitive data is.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, was there somebody else who wanted to mention something? No? Okay. So John, you kind of hit on this a little bit during that first question as far as those security protocols go. But we're seeing a tremendous amount of successful breaches, especially since, again, the pandemic with ransomware and these type of situations. And it doesn't seem like it's necessarily going to slow down anytime soon. Are you able to kind of discuss how the cloud can potentially assist with those in the future?
Yeah, definitely. I think the first thing that we need to understand is that moving to the cloud is when you talk about security, it's a shared responsibility, right? And what that means is think of it as security of the cloud as well as security in the cloud, right? So at Google, we're generally responsible for securing Google's infrastructure, right? And a customer is generally responsible for securing their own data, right? So security of the cloud is done through defense in depth, which I mentioned a little while ago. And security in the cloud is how is that customer going to secure their own data? And the responsibility does vary a little bit depending on the services a customer is using. So if a customer is using infrastructure as a service, right? They might be bringing their own operating system, their own images. They're going to be required to patch those. If they're using a managed service like a platform as a service or something that's serverless, then the cloud provider might be doing the underlying OS patching and making sure there's no security vulnerabilities. But no worries, right? The cloud provider like Google, just because you're responsible for securing your own data, we're still going to help. We're going to provide best practices, templates, reference architectures, and other different products and solutions. So for example, there's analyzers for detecting threats within your environment that's monitoring your logs, right? Who's accessing what? Is there anything that's abnormal? Anomaly detectors for network traffic. We provide vulnerability scanners. So if a customer wants to deploy a web app, in Google Cloud, we have scanners that can look for things like cross-site scripting vulnerabilities or SQL injection vulnerabilities. And so there's a lot of different services that we provide, from managing your own encryption keys or us providing those as well. So what's really different about cloud is you have access to all these native security tools that the cloud vendor is going to provide. But at the same time, you can still bring your preferred third-party tools. If you're using like a SIM from a third-party company, there's nothing that stops you from integrating that into your cloud environment. If you're using any other like vulnerability scanning tools, you can still use those within a cloud environment. And that's really how organizations can help secure their portion, is through all these different tools, through best practices and these templates. But back to defense in depth, that's how that we're going to secure the environment for our customers. And I mentioned this a little earlier, is building security into every layer. So when you look at the physical hardware in a data center and our operating systems, they're actually designed for the sole purpose of providing Google services. So our servers are going to be custom built. They're not going to include any unnecessary components like video cards, peripheral interconnects, or anything else that can introduce vulnerabilities. We have chips that we put on our servers to establish a root of trust. If there's any sort of like BIOS change or firmware change, it would essentially brick the server. So the idea is, the cloud provider needs to provide this security from all the way down at that hardware level, up through their infrastructure when you're talking about applications they're running, network they're running, all the way to that end user, where we have this kind of zero trust model with something called Beyond Corp, that essentially is how do you access end user applications. And so the cloud, to kind of sum it up, the cloud provider is putting in all these different security measures. It's establishing basically zero trust between all these services. But then the user has that responsibility to protect their data, and they're doing that through different, native security tools and third-party tools that work well with the cloud environment.
So Jen, kind of again tapping you for kind of your legal expertise. As John said, it's kind of a partner, so it's almost a shared responsibility. So do you mind kind of discussing that aspect of it, right? If in a legality perspective, who's responsible or anything along those lines with some of these cloud instances?
Yeah, sure. I mean, and as a typical lawyer, I'll say, this is just a presentation. I'm not providing legal advice in any particular case. Everything should be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. But yeah, I mean, John brings up some really good points. I mean, this is why it's really important to understand, what cloud services you're leveraging, who's responsible for what, making sure that those are really clear in the contracts and the terms and conditions. And then the big question is who's liable? There are organizations that think, well, I moved everything to the cloud, so if there's a data security incident, it's their responsibility, not mine. And that's not the case. At the end of the day, the client is ultimately responsible if there is a data breach, as defined under the law, to provide certain notifications to potentially impacted customers, perhaps notice to different regulators. They would be potentially subject to fines and penalties. So at the end of the day, it's really important for the client to make sure that they really understand the cloud service that their provider that they're using, who is responsible for what, because moving to the cloud doesn't mean there's a total shift of risk or liability. So some of these things can be done through understanding contracts, cyber insurance. Different insurance policies may provide for some additional mitigation of risk or shifting of risks or costs with that as well.
Great. Vaughn, talking about kind of the security and layers, security in depth scenario when moving to the cloud. From your perspective, what do organizations really need to try to plan for, prepare for while making these transitions from a security perspective?
Yeah, thanks. John brought up a number of good points, and we would have a lot of the same talking points at Equinix. So, the first thing we will talk about generally from a cloud journey or a hybrid or multi-cloud journey is around the idea of location, which coming from Equinix is probably not a surprise. So because, a customer is adopting, in our case, we see mostly hybrid or multi-cloud architectures, like I said before. Generally, it might keep some stuff on-prem, put some stuff in GCP, and or move some workloads to AWS. So in that sense, we talk about security controls and security transformation from the idea of the intersection or the interconnected control point where all those different ecosystems or domains meet. Then kind of tagging on from the location argument, we talk about the defense in depth or multi-layered security that John was talking about. And I think he mentioned the idea of moving from a perimeter-based approach to a data security or a data privacy approach. We would say the same thing. We would use terminology like, where do you want to inspect all the traffic to apply policy enforcement? So instead of doing that, in the data center or on-prem, now you're doing it at the intersection of all these different locations. How am I going to configure and create policy that is consistent across all these different domains and then deploy that globally to all the different regions where the clouds are located? So very similarly, frankly, to what John said, we would move from a perimeter-based approach to a more security control approach at an interconnected control point, and then suggest customers apply the idea of consistent policy enforcement and consistent visibility so that you can see all the threats and mitigate them from there. And we'll get asked a ton of questions from there is, well, how do I re-architect my access controls or my firewall or my DDoS mitigation and protection solution to be able to accomplish those goals? So we'll then walk customers through, depending on their sophistication or their maturity, a phased approach as to how they can implement controls at that, sort of what we would call a digital edge or at that control point. to implement, the different security capabilities like that to get access to all the cloud environments. So this is a conversation we have, frankly, it feels like every day, because all of our customers are going through some form of that journey, or they wouldn't be talking to us to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jeff, from your perspective, I think you have an interesting approach to these type of things, because ING and W are really the guys that are going there and helping doing some of these conversations around planning and implementing and deploying these processes. As far as like a misconfiguration perspective for the cloud, supply chain, if you wouldn't mind kind of throwing in your perspective on that planning portion of it all, I think it'd be helpful too.
Yeah, I think that, first off on this, when you're planning for security, you're going to have to plan for some changes when you go to the cloud. So what worked on-prem for however many decades, that we've been doing security on-prem, it all doesn't work in the cloud the same way. And so having some holistic approach to how you're going to secure your cloud also involves looking at what you're doing today. So we oftentimes come out and do assessment roadmaps. We look at the portfolio, look at the cloud plans, and match those together. Cloud security has always been a team sport, but cloud is also a team sport. I mean, you got Devops, that's combining teams for collaboration. You got Devsecops, that's adding security into the mix. So really this more embedded sort of approach to security is something that really works well in the cloud, and shifting things to the left. So Gartner says, 99% of the cloud security incidents are the cloud consumer's fault. And so you mentioned misconfigurations, right? So a large majority of those are due to misconfigurations. These services, or the APIs for these services, are exposed to the internet. And so if you don't set those, and it's the customer or cloud consumer's responsibility to set those configurations of those services properly to protect the data that they're protect their data in the cloud. So what tactically we like to talk to the security teams about making sure you've got visibility, real time, anytime, continuous visibility into your cloud footprint. And there's tooling and stuff to do that. There's cloud native within the cloud service providers themselves that provide some tooling for that. There's open source tooling. There's also a cloud security posture management, a whole industry of tools to help look and analyze and assess those APIs and services on a real-time basis, over time, as things change and adapt, and they're able to get real feedback back into how these are configured, and do we have some risks or misconfigurations out there that we need to solve for. On the supply chain side, what I would say there is that, when you're going down your cloud journey, thinking about security, don't forget about your supply chains, right? So, you may have connectivities to business partners, to other consumers, customers, suppliers. When you're building your connectivity to the cloud, you want to make sure that you're thinking of what the exposure is through your supply chain for those cloud services that you're building. So make sure you're limiting access. Make sure you're, preventing access if that's the need from your supply chain connections.
Great. You're talking a lot about, obviously, a different approach, right? And different direction from on-premise to the cloud. From kind of your perspective with seeing organizations kind of mid-transition, how are organizations doing it today? Do you feel that they're doing it the right way? Just out of curiosity, what's your perspective on organizations making that transition current state?
Yeah, well, this has certainly been a challenging and transformational year in general, right? And you know, with the pandemic and the working from home sort of skyrocketing, and then now getting access to services via the internet is a very important thing for businesses to continue to function, operate, prosper, and what have you. We've seen a large growth in cloud, you know, work for us coming into us, which is great for us. You know, whether they're looking to survive or adapt or thrive in the cloud, we've seen a lot of growth in cloud services adoption this year. You know, I think they're by and large trying to do the right thing. They're doing the right thing, but there's a couple of things that stick out that that we think are mistakes from our point of view. And one of the biggest mistakes is thinking that getting to the cloud quickly is going to provide the outcomes and the value that cloud provides, right? So, you know, and when you think about that, the quickest way to get to the cloud is just, you know, if you're doing application migrations, is just do a lift and shift, right? You basically have, you know, application bits running on VMs in your data center, and you're going to take it up and then you're going to put it out in the cloud, in some cloud, on VMs in a public cloud provider or in a private cloud, what have you. And the value of the cloud is not where your applications are located. So the cloud is a location, or is not a location, sorry. The cloud's not a location, it's a pattern. That's how we like to think about it at IGNW, is these are patterns and practices that you need to adopt and adapt to really enjoy the benefits and value of the cloud. And so just taking your server, your, you know, application bits and, you know, dropping it down on a VM in the cloud isn't going to give you that much additional benefit. And so, you know, working into more of these cloud patterns like DevOps, right? CI/CD pipelines, containers, microservices, things like that. Now you really start to be able to unlock and unleash the power that the cloud brings. And then from a security standpoint, you know, I talked about how we embed security in our 4 kind of pillars of the business that we do. Well, that's really a cloud pattern. We need to embed security into the work that we're doing, into these patterns and practices for cloud. So with DevOps, it's Devsecops, right? We want to get we want to automate, we want to get the security scanning and stuff automated in the CI/CD pipeline, to where, you know, as soon as images or packages, you know, get into your repository, you're able to scan those and immediately get results back to the developer that can then resolve the issue, right? You know, we can implement infrastructure as code to deploy policies out into the cloud environment in an automated fashion, repeatable fashion. So, you know, one of the things we try to, one of the services we offer to customers that are really looking, most people are still doing the lift and shift. And so what we offer is what we call a lift and improve, where, okay, we're going to take your application bits and we're going to put them on VMs in the cloud or what have you. But we also want to build some automation for the infrastructure pieces. So infrastructure as code, and automate some of the delivery pipelines, and to help the migration to make it faster and to get customers more familiar with these new patterns and practices of the cloud. And that helps, you know, improve the overall velocity in getting to the cloud, but it also, you know, doesn't require you to refactor or substantially change your applications to get there.
Great. Anybody else like to add?
Yeah, I'll chime in. This is Vaughn from Equinix. I'd like to maybe expand on what was just being talked about with respect to kind of the lift and shift. I mean, we see the same request coming in. Hey, why don't I just virtualize my Fortinet or Palo Alto or Barracuda or whatever firewall and implement that, in a virtual fashion at Equinix or in Google or whatever. We generally would encourage, customers to think about the location from, again, a visibility and a policy perspective. But then, at least from the Equinix point of view, we'll do the lift and improvement. So I'm just going to steal your terminology there in terms of what additional things should you be thinking about. So tagging on to what John and Jennifer said earlier, hey, look, do I have the right access control so that my users can now access workloads and data in the cloud? We'll tag on to the idea of data privacy and data control. As data now flows through different traffic flows, should it be encrypted? Where should it be encrypted? And then how do I do key management from the encryption point of view? Should that be located in Google or should that be located in a more cloud neutral like location? And then we'll even talk to customers beyond that about, like workload visibility. What are my users now doing in the cloud? So kind of like the shadow IT problem, many of us think about. Are they accessing the right types of applications or are they not? What types of files in the cloud should they see or not see? So we'll then expand the conversation beyond the lift and shift to the additional security controls that a customer needs to be thinking about as they go through that journey. We'll then even map out for them, if we can, some sort of phased approach. So if they're starting out by moving some web workloads, we'll do the lift and shift of the perimeter security. But then they, just like the pandemic, I think we've all moved to remote workforce management. How do I deal with VPN and user security from that perspective? And then, think about WAN gateways and use data, move to more of the encryption and data privacy technologies. So I think I generally tend to agree that the transformation usually starts with a question or set of questions about lift and shift, and we try and move that into more of a lift and enhance using Jeff's, I'm just going to steal your terminology.
That's fine.
Yeah, obviously, some of the key takeaways I'm taking this is planning, right? Understanding what are going to be the best things to move, how to move it, when you should move it, who has access to it, those type of situations. I mean, Jen, I'm sure from a legal perspective, there are plenty of things that an organization wants to plan and look at. I'm sure you probably touched on these a little bit earlier as well, but interested to hear your point of view as far as from your perspective, right? What are the key elements that an organization should plan for from a legal perspective while adopting cloud transitions?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And look, as lawyers, we don't want to be the dream killers, right? We want everyone to be able to move forward with their cloud journey. We don't want to disrupt the process, but we just want to make sure that we understand what laws apply so that we can honor and comply with those laws as we go forward. So again, starting with what laws apply, because you could be negotiating with a cloud provider, but if they're not going to sign a BAA, if you're subject to HIPAA, then why are we even talking to them? So, really understanding those laws up front is critical. And many organizations still don't really understand what laws apply. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. I see a number of articles, even from other lawyers who don't really understand what the test is to determine if the GDPR applies or the CCPA applies. And one of the worst things you can do is hold yourself to a higher standard than you're not subject to. So really making sure that you understand those laws is important. Also, as you're negotiating with cloud vendors, we always recommend at the outset, pre-contract, is to enter into a non-disclosure agreement. You're going to be sending a lot of information about your business to the cloud provider as you're evaluating what to do. And having that confidentiality provision in place so that they can destroy or return information when they're done with it if you decide not to move forward with the engagement. I mean, how many people out there have negotiated with many vendors, shared a lot of business sensitive information, decided not to go with them, but never asked for that data back, never asked for that information back. That's really important. And then again, I want to highlight that the emphasis between data security and data privacy. So data security is about protecting data from unauthorized access. privacy is really about, individuals wanting to be left alone and having more control over their information. And so from a data security perspective, I think the laws are pretty well settled as to what the requirements are depending on what law applies. On privacy, especially in the US, it's a little bit of a newer concept. The GDPR in the European Union really was that trailblazer law that really set the stage internationally for what privacy rights should look like. Now we have California and their CCPA law. And basically all these laws allow individual consumers to make requests for information about their data or to change it or have access to it. And so again, those are things that need to be considered when talking to a cloud provider. Other things that would need to be potentially updated are disaster recovery plans. So you have a business continuity plan. Your business would have an incident response plan as it relates to a data breach. A disaster recovery plan should outline what systems we're going to load up first if we do have an incident. And those may need to be updated if you've moved to the cloud for certain services. Also, your incident response procedures may also need to be modified. Our firm does a number of tabletop exercises with clients under privilege to help issue spot legal issues in a data security incident, and really understanding who the cloud providers are, who can we call, what has it already been negotiated in the contract, what's going to happen if there is a data security incident, how information is going to be relayed and how quickly and what kind of information. All those things need to be considered. Also, your record retention policy. So every business should have a record retention and destruction policy. And this says how long we are going to hold on to certain data elements and for how long. And when we're done with it, or don't have a legal basis to hold on to it, we're going to destroy it. Again, are you going back to your cloud provider and making sure that the data that's stored there is properly destroyed, whether you have control over that or the cloud provider has control of it? And then lastly, another thing that I would recommend to clients and developing a plan from a legal perspective is also reviewing that cyber insurance, just to make sure, is there coverage for third parties and where that data is stored.
Great. Yeah, Jeff, I know what you're going through to kind of do that lift and improve, which, Fawn, I'm going to try to steal that one myself and run with that. It's a good term. I'm sure, people's security protocols or practices need to kind of change and adjust based on vertical that they're in, industry, some of those governance and compliance aspects. How do you ensure while you're working with your customers that the right security protocols are being implemented while they're making that transition?
Yeah, and I'll go back to kind of something I mentioned earlier about taking a holistic approach. I mean, really, security has this weakest link problem, right? You're only as strong as your weakest link. And so you really need to take a holistic approach when you're dealing with security and changes in your environment, whether it's cloud or otherwise. And so we really like to, especially if a customer is relatively new to the cloud or the security team is just now getting engaged with the team that's been working in the cloud, we tend to want to do this initial assessment, like I mentioned earlier, where we look at what does the security team have in place today, how are they supporting cloud, and then what are the plans for cloud, and matching those together and building recommendations that we feel are going to suit that particular customer well. And there's no silver bullet for security. We've all heard that. And so there's a little back and forth that we need to do with customers on often to get the right answer in place for particular customers. And they all have different requirements from a legal and regulatory standpoint as well. So, some can get by with the baseline, some need more, some need customizations on top of a baseline, right? So we work with customers to build those out. Now, all of our solutions or all of our services that we come with customers, we have security baked into the process of those. And so the baseline is what's baked in. I talked about baseline. So your standard things like identity and access management. Here's the best practices for cloud for this particular service or this particular way to use the identity and access to the cloud IAM solution, encryption, logging, and hardening these services and workloads, right? So those are addressed really as baselines for our engagements with customers, and then we seek out what we call customizations, which is, okay, the baseline's not enough, what else, right? And so then we bring security teams in to have those conversations, to look for those customizations. Maybe they're not comfortable with the cloud native controls for segmentation and firewalling. Maybe they need to have a virtual version of their on-prem firewalls, deployed in the cloud. So we can help them with that, right? And get that built into the architecture. Traditionally we've spent a ton on preventative controls for security over time, and we really haven't focused a lot on the detective controls, on the visibility, detection, response kind of thing. And I think cloud is a great opportunity to really start to at least balance your preventative and detective controls a little more than, prevention's ideal. There's this old saying, prevention is ideal, but detection is a must. I mean, you have to know when you've been breached. You have to know when you've got problems going on so that you can go and do something about it, right? And so, relying on detective controls in the cloud is, the cloud providers provide a lot of, built-in logging and visibility to their services and workloads. So taking advantage of that, and if we need to dump that into a SIM that's on-prem with the customer, great, that's fine, we can do that. Understand your configurations, right? I mean, that's a big risk. That's where a lot of the breaches are happening right now, or a lot of the incidents are happening right now, is with misconfigurations of those cloud services. So, have some tools to help you out with that, right? And then if the visibility that you're getting from the cloud isn't enough, look at things like cloud workload protection platforms, right? Things that can run as agents on those workloads and give you more information and visibility about how processes are running, and maybe even do segmentation through those platforms. There's a lot of different capabilities there.
Yeah, thank you very much. John, we're talking about configuration. While people are implementing these protocols or new services, what's your perspective on kind of key elements during the implementation phase?
Yeah, and first I'll say it was pleasing to hear Jeff say that they're building security into all their solutions, right? It's not an afterthought. I think that's really important. It definitely starts with building a secure foundation. Using whatever best practices are provided, reference architectures, and so on, to make sure that as you migrate to cloud, you're moving somewhere that's already secure. You need to understand, what regulations do I need to follow or be aware of? PCI, FedRAMP, HIPAA. I think building an environment that adheres to these right away is going to set you up for success. I've actually seen a lot of times where security it's a blocker, because you have an organization that is starting their cloud journey, and they spend all their time talking about, do I re-architect my application for cloud native services, or what am I going to do in the cloud? And it's really focused on everything but security. And you go through this long process to get them ready to move. And then the security team at this organization raises their hand and says, wait a minute, how come you haven't involved me? What are you doing? You can't do that unless we do our audits or whatever they need to do to make sure things are secure. And so it's really important to involve security teams early so that they can help with design. They can, or we can help address any issues or concerns they may have, and really build in security from the start, not later. I think that's a big portion of it. Is no matter what you're doing, security is a component. So even if you don't think it's, I've worked with customers where they come to us for security specific things. I have a payment card processing application that I want to run in the cloud. So we're building a secure environment for that. But more often than not, it's I want to store my data in the cloud, or I want to move this other application in the cloud, and security is an afterthought. So it really starts with knowing that it shouldn't be an afterthought, right? It should be part of that foundation.
Great. And Jeff, I mean, I find it very interesting hearing you guys talk about this with the level of experience and exposure that you have with organizations making this transition and how they're going about doing it. One of the things that S&P is seeing quite a bit of within our customer base are people trying to find or hire cloud professionals inside the organization. Right? Obviously, it's a tough individual to find, but from your perspective, right, what do organizations want to try to look for while they're making this transition for kind of in-house expertise, in-house knowledge?
Yeah, and I'll focus this kind of on maybe more of the tactical security standpoint. So really looking at this from a security team resources. So, first off, and again, roles and responsibilities, you can call things, there's different names for everything, but, basically, a security architect would be someone with cloud expertise, right? Somebody that can engage with the overall program at a high level and be able to collaborate on the security requirements, making sure that we're looking for places to integrate security into these cloud patterns that I talked about earlier, and really ensure that the cloud strategy also includes what you need from a security and compliance standpoint as an organization, right? So making sure that there's engagement up front, as John was kind of highlighting there earlier. Security needs to be engaged from the beginning, and making sure that there are things that impact the cloud architecture, there are things that impact the processes, and there are things that impact how work gets done and how secure your environment ends up being. And so, you don't want to wait until, hey, I'm about to go live, with this thing, and then come engage the security team, and they're going to basically send you back to, ground zero, and, to start over because, well, you got flaws in your code, you've got, vulnerabilities on your images, we can't let this go live. This is crazy, right? And we don't even know what you're doing, right? So there's a need to really embed security and engage and collaborate the whole way through. And I mentioned the team sport thing. Security is a team sport. Cloud is a team sport. Ideally, you'd also have, and I think John mentioned earlier about shared responsibility model for cloud, right? Well, the best place to get security done sometimes is those with the best context and ability to solve it, right? And so we want to move things, we want the developer to be able to write their code. Since they're good at writing code, we train them on secure SDLC, right? We train them on, we give them outputs of code scanning in their IDE so they can address it in their workflow, in their workspace, in their CI/CD pipeline, so that we're not coming in as a security team doing something, giving them some result in some format that doesn't make any sense that they have to then try to interpret back to what they need to do, right? So there's some efficiencies and automation that can be built into these DevOps practices, for security, where it makes it easier for the developer to do it. And since they built it, they own it, so they can fix the security flaws in their code, and then have security checkpoints along the way to, say, yep, good to go, move forward to the next phase of the pipeline, right? So I think that's a big thing, even on the ops side or the platform team. So the people that do the infrastructure as code and actually build the servers and maybe build container images and that stuff. Same thing there. The security aspects of that, we should give them the power within their tool set to build the automations for what's needed for security on the infrastructure side. Whether it's an agent that needs to be included in the in the deployment process and testing process, or vulnerability scanning of images and packages in the CI/CD pipeline, embed that into the process. So the skill sets, could be, security responsibilities for those dev and ops teams and platform teams. So that would be a second area. And then the third area is really around more of a security analyst type role that that's monitoring and maybe reporting on compliance and those kinds of things, monitoring the environment, vulnerabilities, compliance, those kinds of things, and then also responding to incidents and threats as they occur. So more of your security operations type center analyst folks to take that kind of responsibility. And then there could be some tool ownership things that live in the security team. We've seen it both ways, where maybe the platform team owns all the tools, which is kind of ideal, because then they've got full freedom to make it all work together and everything. But sometimes the security team owns some tools, and so security engineering type resources to manage and maintain those security tools that are managed by and maintained by the security team. So that's kind of a lot, but the architecture role is really important, because it gets that kind of holistic approach to how we secure all of the patterns and practices that we're doing. The embedded security responsibilities of your DevOps team, and then your analysts that are monitoring and responding to incidents, and then engineering on top of that if you happen to have a security team that owns tools. So that's kind of what I see from a security standpoint out there today.
Great. And Jen, how about from a legal perspective? I mean, when these companies are moving processes to the cloud, do they need to add individuals to the legal team, or is there additional certifications or anything that would be needed to make sure that that organization is covered?
Yeah, I mean, typically most lawyers don't understand technology or data or privacy or security issues. And I'm saying that the law schools, are just now starting to teach those classes. So, I think that's why, we've done so well with our tech backgrounds with the law. And we know that just like some of the services you guys were talking about that are sometimes hard to find in staff, same for legal. There's just not, there's a lot of people that would like to be in the space, but they don't understand technology. So really hiring a legal team that has a background in cloud technology and cloud offerings, such as software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. They should have obviously background in data security and privacy, as these are fundamental considerations in moving to the cloud, because this expertise really helps the individual understand the contractual implications and the legal risks involved, if any, in moving to the cloud, so they can help mitigate those. And you don't want to have the lawyer who handles your employment issues to do this, right? They're just going to be looking at some sort of general indemnification provisions and not really understand all the data security and privacy provisions, and including any flow down agreements that may be required. So definitely someone or a team that has that background is helpful. As far as certifications, I have a few of them. Especially CIPP for a certified information privacy professional, but I don't think it's necessarily required. I think it can help demonstrate expertise in the space, but experience is what really matters, right? You don't want to go to someone where it's their first time dealing with this, and not just from legal, from all the roles that were just discussed, architects, engineering, and so on. So you want to go with organizations that have a lot of experience doing this, because they're going to do it more efficiently, they're going to do it correctly, and they're going to help you get your end result instead of being a roadblock to getting to the end result.
Great, absolutely. Vaughn, earlier I made a note to ask you about this. Earlier you mentioned multi-cloud, right? Can you discuss kind of the benefits of going for a multi-cloud architecture? I mean, from S&P's perspective, that's probably where the majority of our customers and organizations that we're speaking to are moving to. If you don't mind kind of touching base on multi-cloud, I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, actually, at the beginning, and like you just said, a majority of our customers come and consume Equinix services because they are thinking about or going through a multi-cloud journey. And, I can spout off all the standard arguments around, not putting all your eggs in one basket, or making sure, the right workloads are in the right cloud. Those are all the typical things you would expect. Where I would take the conversation maybe a little further is in two areas. From an Equinix point of view, the location, which I've said many times so far in this panel, becomes important because our customers are trying to get proximate to those clouds. And so we create the proximity or the closeness to any one of them. And that becomes important for certain types of use cases, whether that's, say, in financial services where there's a lot of heavy financial, stock transactions or financial transactions happening, to media and content, being distributed at the edge, to anything else. And so that's why we see multi-cloud architectures happening. So if I dig into that, from this panel's perspective, from a security point of view, think of the data privacy argument. So I'll kind of maybe tout, John and our partners at Google here, right? Equinix and Google both actually have key management solutions, and you would think we have, a little bit of competitiveness there, but in reality, we see those as quite complementary. So in the case of security, a customer might have a key they want to use for data privacy reasons to lock and unlock data that might be stored in GCP. So the natural inclination would be to store the key in Google's EKM as well. But we've worked together where you might want to store that key in Equinix, and there would be many reasons for that. So for example, the idea of separation of duties, where you don't want your key closely associated or located near your data, which would be sitting in GCP in this example. So you might put that in Equinix, and then Google's key manager can retrieve that when necessary. The other reason you might want to do that from a key management perspective is you might want to use the same key in another cloud to unlock data you might have in AWS as well. So you might locate that at a place like Equinix where it has a key management solution. So we do see a lot of multi-cloud architectures, and from a security perspective, whether it is key management or cloud workload visibility, we see the idea of proximity of security controls to those clouds.
Great. Yeah, I just find it interesting that it definitely seems to be the trend, right? That multi-cloud approach. Jeff, again, you kind of touched base on automation. I was thinking about this when we were talking about kind of resources required. And you mentioned, DevOps, security DevOps, those kind of situations. How important, Jeff, is automation in assisting organizing the cloud and helping them reach their goals?
Well, automation is really the name of the game with cloud. It means you can develop and deploy faster and be more agile. And that's a big business value that it's probably the biggest business value that we are seeing customers achieve, is this agility with going to the cloud, right? And automation is sort of a central point in delivering on that. Now the goal isn't to automate everything all at once, you kind of need to take your time. You don't, the whole garbage in, garbage out sort of thing definitely applies, right? So you need to understand your processes really well, how they work, and are they the right process? And then look at, can we attain value from this? Is this something that we do over and over again? And can we automate it? And if we can, if the answer is yes, then do it by all means. Create the tooling to make it happen at that point. So, I mentioned automation will help achieve some of the, greater benefits of cloud. I mentioned agility, speed, but you also get repeatability, stability, compliance. You don't have a person in a GUI making 107 clicks to get it right. there's, you've automated that 107 clicks in something that you can do over and over and over again once you get it right, right? So there's a significant amount of error reduction that automation brings, which supports being more secure, being compliant. It's repeatable, it's stable. So looking at it from a security standpoint, there are a lot of different opportunities for automating some of the security pieces. I've mentioned some of them already, but the code scanning, your vulnerability scanning, all of that stuff can be automated in your CI/CD pipelines, and putting the results of that in your developers' hands right there in their workflow, so they're not jumping out of their workflow to solve problems that come up from a security standpoint. Enforcing security guard, using automation to enforce security guardrails in your pipeline, checkpoint, feedback loops, those things can all be automated. Instead of manually going and tapping somebody on the shoulder, just say, hey, if we meet this threshold, let it go to the next phase, right? So there's a lot of ways that you can use automation to instill security or manage your security processes that historically have been manual. Configurations in your deployment, like we talked about misconfigurations being one of the biggest risks in the cloud. And so making sure you've got the right configuration for what you're trying to deploy, and then being able to make that repeatable. The developer doesn't have to remember 131 GUI steps, right? We've done it this way, it was right, and we're going to continue to build this service this way, right? So it really puts the repeatability in there of, and then also deploying security configurations and agents out. Maybe you're running cloud workload protection platforms or something that's monitoring your VMs in the cloud, or providing some security service for the cloud. That can all be packaged into the CI/CD pipeline and rolled out as part of the process, and not have to come in after the server's been stood up and deploy an agent manually and get it up and running and reporting to the console or what have you. So a lot of ways to do that. Also within the development environment, you've got this notion of, essentially what you want is you're shifting left security. We've often, historically, we've waited until right before production, we get a security review, and they send us back to ground zero, right, to fix all these problems, right, and then we can't go live. Well, we're shifting left. Let's address security in the full life cycle of solution delivery, the full development life cycle, the build life cycle, the test life cycle, and then eventually in production. So address our security concerns where they should be addressed, so that there's speed in getting through the pipeline. Managing secrets, that all can be automated instead of developers, intentionally or otherwise storing clear text passwords and secrets within their code. Use a secrets management platform so that the secret is only gathered when it's needed, and it's kept in a secure location and secured all the time. It's not in clear text in somebody's code. So yeah, there's a lot of benefits, and I think it is the greatest enabler for meeting some of the value propositions that cloud brings.
Great, thank you. And John, just while we're talking about this automation process, do you mind kind of chiming in on some of the application platforms, the OpenShift, Google Cloud Platform? Talk about how those could assist in going towards this automation transition.
Yeah, definitely. I think Jeff made some good points, so I'll probably be reiterating a little bit of what he said. But as companies look to modernize, right, their goal is to release code faster, right, reach their customers quicker, remove the human element out of some of these tasks. And they do that by taking advantage of Kubernetes and other cloud native services, instead of the traditional way of doing things with like VMs. And however, what happens is this trade-off emerges. It's agility versus security. Right? Developers want to be more agile, but security teams want more control. And so what you're seeing as organizations shift to this DevOps model, they're starting to implement new security features that work within your CI/CD pipelines. And some of these come alongside of these managed Kubernetes offerings. Things like automated scanning of container images for vulnerabilities, or checking to make sure only a trusted image is going to get deployed to production. I think Jeff mentioned, I think this is kind of one of the latest buzzwords I've been hearing lately, but he mentioned it earlier, is Devsecops, right? And it's the combination of DevOps and SecOps, where DevOps is, it focuses on speed, where SecOps focuses on, having security at every level of the development cycle. And so DevSecOps is that compromise that allows developers to stay agile, right? But incorporates security. And so as you see these different platforms coming out, like Google Kubernetes Engine, we have our multi-cloud product called Anthos. You're seeing, not only are you getting a platform for DevOps, but you're getting security tools built in to help with that DevSecOps kind of lifecycle.
Fantastic. I mean, I think that comes to a close as far as the panel discussion goes. I want to take a second to thank every single one of you for participating today and sharing your experience and knowledge with not only myself and the rest of the SMP individuals on the call, but also all the people who are participating on the far side as well. I thought it was fantastic. I thought there was a lot of great insight and a lot of understanding of what organizations need to do and need to look at to make sure that this transition goes as smoothly as possible, and some of the key elements of what to focus on day one. So again, thank you very much. With that, I'll hand it back over to Sean for closing out. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jonathan. Jennifer, just curious, before I jump in and close this out, did we get any questions? Or does anybody have any questions if we want to take them off mute?
So I will, let's see, there was a couple questions relative to the pandemic and the transition to cloud kind of as a reaction of the pandemic, and how the pandemic is impacting digital transformation. They're kind of general, and we may have touched on that a little bit, but I'll leave that one there for you.
This is Vaughn.
Okay.
From Equinix.
Ahead,
I'll
Vaughn.
chime in. So one of the things we've seen quite a bit, not surprisingly, is obviously the move to remote workforce management. And as that trend has basically expanded, whether we like it or not, we see a lot of companies, especially mid-sized to smaller enterprises, who didn't necessarily have plans for that. So things like VPN, like I said, remote access gateways, so that employees can now access IT tools from home. We've seen a lot of virtual spin-ups and implementations of that, and you can imagine why. That's so employees get access to resources, to those IT tools, and then those gateways or those tools can be spun down if and when the pandemic subsides and all of us as remote employees return to work. So that's been a big thing we've seen in the last 6 months or so, as an example.
Yeah, us too, Vaughn. I mean, from a service delivery perspective, and implementing solutions on the fly like that, there's so many quotes out there with regards to 10x transformation, things that folks weren't going to do for years, they ended up doing in weeks. So yeah, I think that's what the question was leaning towards, Jennifer. Anything else?
No, I think you guys covered a lot of ground here.
All right, well, I'm just going to close out with a couple of closing statements. And I, Jonathan, I agree, right? So thanks so much to the panelists. Great discussions, great feedback and insight onto the things that you specialize so much on. So why did SMP pull this event together, right? Obviously, this is very top of mind for our clients, but it's also very, very much where SMP specifically is headed, right? I think for the Googles, the Equinixes, and IGNWs of the world, we're in an interesting territory up here where you see where our locations are. And we're really starting to see, multi-cloud plans become developed, right? For those who don't have a multi-cloud strategy right now, They're certainly developing that, right? And there's stats out there from Flexera and Morpheus where, 90 to 100% of the folks surveyed in their last year's report did have a strategy. Well, a lot of those clients probably aren't in the Northeast, right? And while I mentioned that we've got national and international clients, it's really, really important to call out that a traditional solution provider focused on metal infrastructure, software, and applications that sit in the premise-based data centers that our clients manage, right? Their cheese and our cheese is being moved. So one of the big focuses for SMP over the last 2 years has been an investment in our multi-cloud strategy as a solution provider, right? And developing partnerships with the Googles, the Equinix, and the IGNWs and packages of the world is crucial to that, right? So secure multi-cloud solutions so that organizations can leverage multi-clouds and avoid vendor lock-in and design and architecture at the end of the day with a digital edge and the likes of an Equinix sitting in between all of this is integral to that strategy, right? So you heard Vaughn talk about the importance of getting close to the cloud providers' regions. Google, for example, I think their connectivity, they're in 37 plus metros right now, right? Google and Equinix together, right? With less than 2 milliseconds of latency between their cloud exchange and the Google Cloud. So think about the power of that. Think about as you're looking at data center transformation, data center consolidation, putting together an edge at the end of the day in an Equinix facility so that you can simply come out of your rack and plug into Google Cloud, right? And any of your SaaS providers and service providers that may be there. So architecturally, I think it's really, really important for you to know why we are partnering so closely with Equinix in this regard. Additionally, to touch on the rest of the panelists here, we have our own partner ecosystem circle here, and John Klausner, our Director of Data Center Network and Cloud Solutions, is here in this meeting today. We built this over the last several months, and that we've got our strategic providers, we've got complementary solution partners, right? And then we've got our strategic services partners that sit into this mix, right? As you go through Google, you know very, very much what they're doing. And we are so incredibly tightly aligned to them. Very, very great market opportunity for Google in our territories. And we've attached ourselves to them as the leading cloud provider, all right? We just took you through our relationship with Equinix and what we're doing there. As you go through the IGNWs in the packages of the world, I think you see where they fit here. And it's like, and then, so package from a legal perspective in IGNW for a true service delivery arm that can take things on that SMP as a 120 person organization just isn't equipped to do yet. And then you look at the rest of the ecosystem. We touched on our strategic partners in the beginning with regards to infrastructure and software. And then all the complementary solution providers that are integral in a multi-cloud strategy are built out in here. And at the end of the day, where we have a unique advantage as a solution provider is to act as the master facilitator of all these things on behalf of our clients. There's so many players that are integral into this strategy, right? And I think that it was that you heard all that today. So in closing, I just want to thank the panelists again. We can't thank you enough. We truly appreciate your preparing for this and taking time. And thanks to the clients that were able to attend. That's all I have.